Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. Porat, your host for the first episode of the Ramble, which is a rather weird and young podcast that will hopefully see many more episodes later on. And here on the Ramble, we do just that. We ramble. We talk about weird subjects and things we find interesting. And so, for the first episode ever of The Ramble, I have a good friend of mine joining me today, who is going to go by the alias of Theo for their anonymous protection. So, without further ado, I think we're going to get into it. How you doing, Theo?
Good, how are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm a little nervous, but...
Yeah, me too.
I know we discussed that. So I really want to thank you for showing up. You're obviously helping me out a lot. And so, for the episode that we're going to be doing today, we're obviously going to be talking about the perils of creative writing. And I know we're very excited.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I'm ready.
As creative writers ourselves. So being that, we are amateurs, not only just in creative writing, but also podcasts, we're going to try and do our best. And just start off with a chill conversation about this and our experience. So to kind of get us kicked off, I know this is something that I think about quite often, but I kind of wanted your perspective on this. So when it comes to your creative writing process, do you have any, I don't know, I guess you could say tenets or rules that you pertain to consistently?
See, this is hard because I've been revamping my craft strategy recently. I've been reading a lot of books about writing, super meta stuff. So, I think the thing that stayed the same though, even though I've done all of that, is I like to think about it. That's the whole reason I write, is I want to see something, I want to do something that I've never seen before, either in, any form of media, namely books. I do a lot of reading, but shows, movies, or if I have seen something like in a show or a movie or another book that I'm like, that was super cool, but I feel like it could have been, it was shoved to the side a little bit. It could have been cooler. I'll take that concept and workshop it and maybe put it at the focal point of something that I'm doing, and explore it a little bit more and give it the attention that it didn't get in that other form of media. So stripping away all of the new age writer me craft nonsense, and all the stuff I'm trying to learn about, story composition and all, whatever. I think that's always been the through line, was I try to do stuff that I haven't seen much of, or take something that someone has blatantly told me, they're oh, that would never work. And I'm well, now I'm going to make it work. You understand that I now have to make it work.
See, I think that's partially why we're such good friends, because you see that as a challenge when people say that. And I'm the same way, because someone says that it can't be done that way. And our first instinct is to try and prove those people wrong. And it's not even so much, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel necessarily, but we're trying to say, just because it hasn't been done doesn't mean that it can't be. And I think kind of like what you're saying, that's kind of at the core of what I want to do when I'm doing my writing as well. And, getting inspiration from movies and shows and video games and stuff like that. And I think I do agree with you. I think it's a space for me to try and do something that I have not seen done in the things that I've enjoyed through other mediums. and
Mm-hmm.
that can be exciting. It can also be a little daunting, but it's an exciting aspect to it. And at times, I don't know if you feel the same way, so feel free to let me know if you do. But I find sometimes when I'm interacting with other material, whether it be a video game or books or a movie, I sometimes have a hard time distancing myself from it in the way where I'm almost kind of trying to write up a story within my mind already that's in the same vein of what
Mm-hmm.
I'm interacting with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes I feel like that almost hurts me from interacting with other material. I mean, sometimes I just want to sit down and I want to watch Haunting of Hill House, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I can't because I'm already thinking about writing a story that can kind of evoke some of the same feelings.
Yeah. No, I get that way sometimes too. With something really immersive, I can kind of put that to the side and I really, get into what I'm watching or reading or whatever. But yeah, there
Right.
are some things that I'm just like, it's just like, it's a little bit off, or, there's something not quite, and, I'm grabbing onto pieces of it and I'm like, I could do that this way. And if I, mix that with an idea that I already had, like that would create something really interesting that I hadn't thought about before. So then, yeah, I kind of go down the rabbit hole about like, how would I do this? And yeah, I don't think it's necessarily about reinventing the wheel so much as it's about like adding your own. I mean, that's all writing. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Everything is inspired by everything else.
Mhm.
I'm not naive enough to think I've ever had a completely capital O original idea. But I think, I mean, that's all writing ever is at least for me, like
Mhm.
taking something, an idea, concept, nothing super like, not plagiarism, obviously. Um, just putting my own spin on it. Because, like, it doesn't matter. My writing style is completely different from, I could write word, like, beat for beat a chapter of something that already exists, and it would end up completely different because my style is just different.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think about that a lot where especially when I'm watching, like, especially movies and shows, I think about, like, how did they put that in the script that it ended up this way? And how would I do it instead in the written format to convey the same thing, or maybe tweak it a little bit to get it to say
Mhm.
something, a bit more nuanced, like, so yeah, I do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I know what you mean, and it's definitely it's an interesting experience to go through that because I like what you said because you're talking about taking something and writing it um the same essential makeup of what has been written before, but you're putting your own spin on it because it's you and you have your own
Hmm.
style. And I think that is ultimately what it comes down to is that we have these things called tropes and cliches. I don't know if you've heard of them before, but
Oh yeah, for sure.
um, yeah, they're very interesting. But it's tropes and cliches are not in of themselves bad things. It's just how they're utilized because they are elements that most stories kind of need in order to keep certain things moving along, but it's just how you write them. It's how you
Hmm.
present them. And if you're just doing it with no care at all, then all you have left is the cliche or trope. You don't have anything
Hmm.
else other than that.
Yeah, I do try. I think about that a lot. Because I struggle sometimes to figure out where exactly the line is between, overused tropes or cliches versus like tenets of the genre.
Mhm.
Like there are certain there's this one book I read recently. I read The Seven Basic Plots by Christopher Booker, and I don't always agree with Christopher. Um but he makes a lot of points that there are, within genres there are, specific things that have to happen, or specific story types, or specific things that have to be there in order for it to be that genre or be that type of story. And I yes, yes, to a certain extent. But at what point does your story become mediocre or derivative or contrived just from like just like everything, it's just like everything else that's been written in that genre, or the most basic boiled down version of that genre. And I think about that where it's like, okay, what needs to be in here to give me the feel, the vibe of the genre that I want, but doesn't throw me into like trope cliche land where I'm just stacking trope on trope on trope until it's just that. But then on top of that too, I sometimes will try to take, if I figure out what goes with what and what tropes are cliches and what stuff is in which genre, I will take. That's the other thing I like to do, is messing around with stuff, making it my own. I try to take tropes that aren't really seen in a certain genre and put them there and see if I can get it to work. Just to see, like, okay, is there a reason that people aren't doing this? Or is it just that, like, we don't think about it because it's not usually, this thing isn't normally associated with the genre. And that's just mostly, like, a mental exercise for me. I do that a lot when I want to do, like, practice writing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely understand where you're coming from. And I know, because you're talking about, taking something that people think they have seen before and then kind of trying to change it. And that's the challenge. And that's, I don't know if, I think we have talked about this, but have you read the Three Body Problem?
No, I haven't. And I ordered it and it's on its way because with all this media coming out surrounding it, I want to read it first.
Oh yes. Well, I don't really want to talk about the show because that's going to make me angry. But we'll probably do that sometime because that's an interesting conversation on its own. But the thing with Three Body though is it's very much. I obviously don't want to spoil anything about it for anybody that hasn't read it or seen the show yet. But the basic premise is something that has been done many times before in other sci-fi mediums. But it is done in the book, at least. In the books, it's done in such a creative and nuanced way that it makes it feel wholly original. Even though the basic concept is something that's been around for, it feels like eons, just so long in the sci-fi realm.
Yeah. Well, that's another one of I'm sure, if I had to guess, I would say that it's something to do with, world building or character design or both, likely. Because, I don't know, for me, that's what all people like to argue with me about this. I think that most good writing boils down to whether or not you have strong characters than whether or not you have, the best world building or the best plot in the world. Because at least, I imagine it kind of as like a Venn diagram with three circles. You obviously have to have all of them. Your world has to feel real, even if it's not like something super immersive like fantasy or sci-fi. Like, it still has to feel real. And, your plot, it has to be good. It can't have any, gaping holes in it. It can't be, the most boring thing you've ever read. So, like, yeah, obviously you have to have those things. But for me, it all boils down to characters and whether or not they feel like real people. Because at least, I feel like a character has the opportunity to be as close to as completely original as you can get with any creative writing. Like, your character, it just, the character itself has so much nuance to it, and then you have, obviously, multiple characters. I don't know, I think that's something else I try to, I focus a lot on, is getting my characters right, and I spend a lot of time with them, and making sure that they feel real, and not just like, oh, here's, standard fantasy man who's, the average height and the average build and the average intelligence and does everything average ever. But he goes on a super sick journey. Like, yeah, sure, the journey could be the coolest thing in the world, but like, I don't want to follow average Joe. I want to follow somebody interesting, because that's just the other, the next layer to it.
Right. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And average Joe, he can just be an average Joe, because you can still put a spin on that.
He can, but there has to be a reason.
There has to be a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's interesting, and it's funny that you mentioned. I wanted to bring this up because this was pissing me off, and I know we briefly mentioned this at one point when we were talking about doing the first episode, but I had been, because you had mentioned people try to argue with you about some of this stuff sometime, and I was thinking about a conversation I had. I think it was like earlier this month. I'm sure I've had it before, but I think this specific one was earlier this month, and we were talking about like meaning in stories and the meaning behind events that take place within each story. And she was basically of the mindset that every single thing that happens in a story needs to have meaning and purpose behind it, whether it's hidden or otherwise. And I disagreed with her. To kind of just put it bluntly, I said that not everything needs to have a hidden meaning. Not everything needs to have this, I don't know, almost like omniscient purpose beyond it. Sometimes a chair is just a chair, and there's no underlying meaning about anxiety with the chair sometimes. Sometimes it's just a chair. So what do you think about that?
You know, I agree and I disagree, because I don't think meaning is the right word. Purpose, at least for me, is a better word to use. Because, like, yeah, no, I don't think everything needs to have, quote unquote, meaning. Like, that sort of, like, literary depth. Not everything has to be a symbol, not everything has to be a motif. Like, it doesn't need to be this, like, readers get sick of that after a while. Nobody wants to be, doing mind gymnastics the whole time. But I do think that, and that's advice that I've seen over and over again, is that everything, every scene, every beat, every chapter has to have meaning, and it has to push your story along in some way. So if it doesn't directly contribute to the plot, it has to contribute to character growth or world building. Not exclusively world building, because nobody likes when you just like describe a bush for 30 minutes. Nobody enjoys it. But
some people do.
So I think for me, it's less about meaning, and I think you can. That's the thing. If you're determined enough, I was gonna say talented enough, but I would say if you're determined enough, you can shove meaning into anything. Is that gonna be good? Probably not. Right. So meaning, I would say choose your symbols and your metaphors wisely. But yeah, I do think that most things should have a purpose. Because I could write a scene where my main character is just sitting there having a conversation with another character. Nothing technically is happening, but the purpose of that scene isn't to further the plot, it's to explain my characters. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautifully put, because I would say I'm of the same mind with that. Because I think it's indicative of what I think about when I'm interacting with stories in any medium. And I'm sitting there, and sometimes, a conversation between two characters, there's not some higher allegorical purpose to it. Sometimes the purpose is just to get to know those two characters. That is the purpose of that scene. There doesn't always have to be like this lofty philosophical backdrop to it. And it obviously depends on the type of story, naturally.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really like how you put that, with purpose. And you know what? Maybe that's what she meant. I don't know specifically. It's I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. We may have disagreed on some things, but I really do like how you put that. And I think like it's kind of interesting, because I don't want to put you on the spot, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but you are obviously writing stuff right now as well. We both are. And with your stuff, I haven't actually read any of your stuff. I don't think you've read any of my stuff. We haven't done that yet. We probably should, but we'll do it at some point. But I was gonna ask, when it comes to like that, when you're writing, and it's kind of derailing a little bit from talking about purpose and meaning, but sometimes when I'm trying to convey purpose in my stories, I realize that certain beats are easier to explain than others. I actually find that I have a hard time writing action. I feel like it's a lot messier for me. And I don't mean and sometimes it's not even like high octane action. It's just someone is rushing to get home.
Things are happening.
Yeah, things are happening. And then I find like I have an easier time when it's the quieter scenes and people are just kind of having general discourse. I mean, where do you sit in all of that?
I don't know. It really depends on whether or not I'm confident in the section that I'm writing, because there are some times where I find it really easy. The words just come. They're just flowing. I'm in the zone. And I can write, the action scene and then the accompanying like kind of recovery scene. No problem. But then there are some times where like I really suck at beginnings. Because I don't know, there's so much that I could focus on and I don't know. I always end up coming back and revising the beginnings of things. And yeah, I think, I don't know, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I feel like I'm pretty decent at dialogue. I didn't know dialogue was like hard. Not to like,
yeah,
I don't know.
We're not
but
those
like
people.
for me, for me, it was always just like, okay, I'm imagining, I'm watching a movie or a show or a play or something, and these characters, they're real enough to me that I can just observe them talking. And I'm not saying that I don't struggle with it at all, but my dialogue usually comes out pretty natural. Nobody's monologuing about things they shouldn't be. I've got my, I've got the vibe of things that I want. I do struggle with, like having unique voices for each character. So that's something that I've been working on a lot. But so yeah, there's scenes where there's a lot of dialogue that I get into a groove where I'm like, oh, well, they're talking. And then in between the talking, I have to have things happening because it can't just be talking. And then it kind of just rolls. But yeah, there are certain scenes where it's a lot of like, I don't want to say drudgery, but like I have one section that I'm writing right now where he's just walking. He's got places to be. To be fair, it's an important walk. And a lot of other stuff happens. But, like, there's not so much dialogue as there is, like, exposition and world building and just, like, bland types of action. Right. And yeah, I've been really struggling with that, too, because it just, like, I really struggle with the pacing with those kinds of scenes. Where, dialogue, you have conversations all the time. You can follow the natural cadence of a conversation. You're familiar enough with that you can do it. I can replicate it pretty easily in my writing, I feel. But, like, not often do I take a 300-mile walk through an enchanted forest. So I don't have any experience with that. And even if I did, I would probably just be complaining and upset the whole time, and nobody wants to read about that. So... circling all the way back around to purpose.
Yes.
I don't know. As long as my scenes fill, at least in the first draft, some sort of purpose, like I always can go back and layer another purpose on top of that. Because, you obviously, like, I suck at foreshadowing in the first draft, and I think foreshadowing is really important. I think it's super cool when it's done really well, especially like on a reread. But like you can't really foreshadow that effectively when you don't even know what's going to happen. So your scene that might have started out just as a conversation between two characters, exploratory style, you might be able to, wedge some foreshadowing in there later, or usually, the older, wiser character that isn't your main character can say something, super like, ooh, wow, a life lesson that the main character will eventually learn, but is too naive and stupid to realize right now. Haha. Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I was thinking about my own stories that I'm writing and moments where I have to deal with stuff like that, and I mean, kind of like you said, like foreshadowing can be hard, especially if you don't know what you want the next step to be just yet. And
well, it's even also about like how it happens, because you might know
right.
what happens. Like if you outline, if you whatever, like you might have a general idea of what's gonna happen. But I find that
Right.
like my characters will dictate to me how things happen when I get there.
Mm-hmm.
They'll tell me, like they'll become people of their own, and they'll have initiatives that they sometimes, and I'm like, whoa, you're getting a little too, you're going off script there, my man. But that, like, until you've written it, you don't know exactly how it happens, so like your foreshadowing isn't as nuanced until you get there and you actually know exactly, like, oh well, there's a bird in this scene, so I have to put a bird way back here. But until you write that second bird, can't write the first bird.
That's true. And sometimes you can go back, and that's the beauty of it, is that,
well, you should always go back.
You should always go back. And it's not like a haircut, You can keep doing stuff
no,
to
I
it,
don't.
and you can go back. Well, I guess you wouldn't know, yeah.
I get my haircut like once every 6 months.
Yeah, you're lucky. So I guess that was a bad example, so we'll say that. But I think you got the gist of what I meant.
Yeah.
I think. I hope I did. But no, I definitely hear you with that. And I think that's interesting. And I think it's interesting because I know when we're talking about this, a lot of our discussion has been us like talking about, like, I don't know, challenging aspects of this process and everything of creative writing, which is not to make it seem. It is the perils, which is obviously not to make it seem like we despise creative writing. We obviously love it. Right.
Creative writing.
Right.
It's a burden we must bear.
Right. We're not like some religious figure that is like sacrificing our joy and happiness for the art of creative writing. Like that's not, like, we enjoy it. We love it. It's a world that we are enamored with. But, it's just interesting because we're still relatively new to this world of creating expansive creative writing pieces and eventually putting them out there. And I know that was something that I was thinking about when we're thinking about this, and we've written like other types of stories and stuff like that, but some of the stuff that we're working on right now is sci-fi. And sometimes I sit there and I wonder, why did I do that to myself? To do sci-fi as one of my early genres, because it's so, and you've complained about that to me before too, because yours is very like, because mine is more so a story set within a sci-fi world, and yours is kind of more focused on the actual like scientific elements of like, isn't it like faster than light travel and stuff like that?
Yeah. I think of it, I don't know if this is like the technical term, but I think of it as like, near future sci-fi.
Yeah.
So like, I had full disclosure, I'm taking a break from sci-fi right now because I jumped in feet first to trying to create. I never wanted to be an astrophysicist, I'll just say that. And I feel like for a while there I kind of was, because I had to figure out, like, okay, logistically, if they have this much fuel and this type of rocket, how far could they get, how long would it take them, would they be dead by then, like what else would need to happen, it's just like rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole, because I want it to be like, that's the kind of sci-fi that I enjoy, is that like near future survival style, like technically, theoretically feasible, type of sci-fi, that just, it's great in theory. I am not equipped with any of that knowledge. So the research aspect was, yes, it was for a while a cross to bear, and it was cool. I love learning about space. But, after a while, you spent 6 months in the weeds, like, learning, the intricacies of, nuclear power and, slingshot maneuvers and whether or not they'd kill your crew in this, rinky-dink spaceship you've put them in. After a while, you're like, man, I haven't written anything. Because there's also that pressure of, like, for me at least, I don't want to write something that I haven't researched at least a little bit, because if I have to, like, there's so much stuff that hinges on the early foundation you set up. So if you set it up wrong, you're stuck rewriting the whole thing, the second draft, when you realize that you've miscalculated something, 20 chapters in. So that was, sci-fi. I love sci-fi. It's definitely an underrated genre, at least in my opinion, because it gets kind of shoved in with fantasy. Yeah,
I guess.
A lot of times it's just like, oh, sci-fi is like a subgenre of fantasy, which, like, I mean, yeah, but, like, I feel like there's enough of it. It's mainstream enough now that it could be its own. I don't know. It needs a renaissance, in my opinion.
No, I think I agree with you, and I think we're not going to talk about Marvel movies, but
oh, why not?
Well, I think in terms of what you're talking about, and like sci-fi kind of like coming into its own, I don't think things like, for example, the Marvel movies or other medium equivalent types of stories, I don't think they really help that case, because those are very much sci-fi fantasy. And so obviously that doesn't help the case of, because Marvel is very popular. Obviously, a lot of people love it. They love their stuff, and you're going to get more and more stuff like that. But then it's nice for people like us when we get actual sci-fi, like The Expanse, which I have not started watching. I know you keep telling me to. I have not gotten to it yet, and I really want to. But but like stuff like that, it feels like it's almost like sci-fi is the indie film industry, and then fantasy is like Hollywood, basically. At least that's a gross generalization, but that's kind of how I look at it sometimes. With the way that it's all put out there and everything. Not to say that everything that's sci-fi is good, but
I mean, yeah. I mean, you can't say anything in any genre is all going to be good, but yeah, no, I think, I don't know, sci-fi. I do really like sci-fi, and I think one of my first, like, real introductions to, like, that near future, theoretically plausible sci-fi was The Martian. I love that book so much, and I do not like the movie, for reasons I will not get into here. But the book is just, you can tell. Some people think that it's, like, too technical, and there's all this jargon,
that's what I like.
Whatever he's babbling about, potatoes and math and the computer and the water, and I'm like, yeah, but I know that so much, like, consideration went into this, and, like, he obviously, has passion for this genre, the story, the science. And I don't know, I go back and reread it every once in a while, because I don't think, like, that narrative style, like, that journal style, isn't my, like, preferred. I enjoy reading it. I don't enjoy writing it so much. I don't feel like that's not my vibe. My writing style doesn't really go well with that that journal style. But I do reread it, just to get that feel for, like, okay, how does he blend the science, the accurate science, with the, fantastical surface of Mars, which, he hadn't been to. So, you make up some stuff and not other stuff, but the real problem for me is like putting them together. Because I could write a report on all the science stuff that I've learned, but that's super boring.
Well, there is an audience for that, though.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I do know what you mean, and I think it's with something like The Martian, because I agree with you, because that's kind of how the three body problem is too. All three of those books, they're very meticulous, they're very technical, and that's why, again, I'm not going to get too much into this, but because I don't want to derail everything, but with the Netflix adaptation of Three Body Problem, it loses so much of that nuance, both culturally and just in terms of how it's presenting the story. Because some of the stuff that's in the Three Body Problem and all three of those books, some of the ideas and things that happen in it, if you just hear it out of context, you would say, "What the hell? How is that even? That makes no sense. That doesn't sound like something that would be in a smart Chinese sci-fi novel." But you read it, and there's so much time devoted to fleshing that idea out in the book and explaining what's going on that even if some elements of it are a little hard to believe, you believe it within the context that it's in. And it makes perfect sense. With the show, though, there's so much that's lost in translation that it's basically, this is a gross generalization, but it's almost like Michael Bay is presenting these ideas, and because they're dumbed down compared to the novel. And I know that happens in some ways when you're doing adaptation, but this was in a way where it was just so stripped for parts that all you have left is a lot of the weird sci-fi stuff. And for people like us, we're going to see that in the show and be like, well, this doesn't make nearly as much logical sense. It doesn't feel like it's
you're missing the build-up.
You're missing the build-up.
Yeah. No, I've got a writer friend who's really good at that. Where, to say, like, there's one scene in one of his stories where, like, the main character ends up, like, half naked outside with a sword with, like, threatening a dog in someone's backyard. And, like, to say that, you're like, how did this even happen? But, like, reading all of the chapters that lead up to that scene, you're like, oh, this makes complete sense. Like, of course that would be there, because this happened, 20 pages ago. And, like, it's that, like, the weaving of the threads that I personally struggle with sometimes. My threads get tied up into knots that I really struggle to undo sometimes. But if I can master that, I think I would be proud of myself for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, being a creative writer, you never stop learning, you never stop growing, you just never stop improving, and it's kind of the beauty of it. And I love that journey, and it's great to meet people like you, obviously, where we can have these conversations and we can build each other up. And it's a beautiful thing. And I think that's probably where we'll end the first episode, because I know Theo and I could probably go all night talking about stuff like this. So again, Theo, my good friend, I want to say thank you again for helping me to make history. And by making the first episode of the Ramble podcast with me. It's been an honor.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. And to the listeners, all two of you, I'm sure, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully there will be many more episodes to come. Thank you.